While Saddam Hussein epitomized authoritarian rule, his two sons, Uday and Qusay Hussein, were infamous extensions of his brutal regime, groomed as heirs to his legacy of fear and control. Known for their cruelty, corruption, and unrestrained power, the two brothers left behind a trail of terror that solidified their positions as some of the most feared figures in Iraq during their father's reign. The reign of Uday and Qusay came to an abrupt and bloody end on July 22, 2003, following the US-led invasion of Iraq. Uday Saddam Hussein was born on June 18, 1966, during a turbulent time in Iraq. His father, Saddam, was imprisoned for his political activities as a member of the Ba'ath Party. Accounts of Uday's early years paint a conflicting picture. Some describe him as a cheerful and playful child who exhibited a natural charm, while others recall his tendency for cruelty even in youth, foreshadowing his later actions. Academically, Uday was average, and though he expressed ambitions of studying nuclear physics, these aspirations were likely an attempt to emulate his father's grandiose vision of Iraq's power. Ultimately, he settled for Baghdad University, where he pursued a degree in engineering. During his time at university, Uday began to build a reputation for arrogance and entitlement, traits that were exasperated by his proximity to his father's growing influence. At just 21 years old, Uday was appointed chairman of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the Iraq Football Association, position that marked his entry into public life and his emergence as a prominent figure in Saddam's regime. These roles, however, were far from mere administrative appointments. Uday quickly turned them into instruments of control and brutality. He founded the Al-Rashid Sports Club, forcing Iraq's top athletes to join under threats and coercion. Those who resisted faced unimaginable punishments. Athletes who failed to meet his expectations were beaten with concrete balls, had their feet whipped until they bled, or endured medieval torture methods designed to break their spirits. Tales of imprisoned and tortured athletes circulated widely, becoming synonymous with Uday's name. One particularly harrowing account described how Uday personally oversaw the dragging of a coach across gravel for perceived disobedience. The Olympic Committee headquarters became a site of fear and cruelty, housing torture chambers where psychological and physical torment were inflicted daily. As Uday's power grew, so did his sadistic tendencies. Uday's erratic mood swings added another layer of unpredictability to his cruelty. He could charm guests at a lavish party one moment, and in the next, unleash brutal violence upon those who displeased him. His sadism extended beyond political retribution of enforcing loyalty. It was an extension of his deeply rooted psychopathy, leaving countless victims in perpetual fear of crossing his path. Uday's reputation as a playboy masked a darker and far more sinister reality of unchecked violence against women. His wealth, power, and the pervasive fear he inspired allowed him to act with impunity. Uday routinely used his status to abduct and assault women, many of whom were selected at random from social gatherings, streets, or even schools. Women and their families lived in constant fear of his gaze, knowing that his whims could ruin lives without warning or consequence. In one infamous incident that shocked even Saddam's inner circle, Uday abducted and assaulted a bride on her wedding day, an act that demonstrated his complete disregard for social norms or human decency. Numerous accounts emerged of women resorting to extreme measures to avoid his attention, including hiding for days or fleeing to rural areas. Some families went so far as to marry off their daughters in secret or falsify information about their whereabouts, all in an effort to evade Uday's predatory reach. Uday's brutality extended even to those within his father's inner circle, marking him as a liability despite his position as Saddam's eldest son. In 1988, during a grand party hosted by the regime's elite, Uday's erratic behavior culminated in a shocking act of violence. In a fit of rage, he bludgeoned Kamel Khana Gigio, Saddam's trusted bodyguard and food taster, to death with a club. The murder was reportedly fueled by Uday's jealousy and his belief that Kamel had too much influence over Saddam. Witnesses described the scene as horrifying, with Uday's uncontrollable fury on full display. This brazen act enraged Saddam, who viewed the murder not only as a personal betrayal, but also as a reckless disregard for the regime's stability. As punishment, Uday was briefly imprisoned and then exiled to Switzerland, where he reportedly continued to display erratic and violent behavior, including run-ins with local authorities. His time abroad was marked by isolation and resentment, but his exile was short-lived. By leveraging his mother's influence and Saddam's eventual forgiveness, Uday returned to Iraq, resuming his role in the regime and continuing his reign of terror. In 1995, Uday established the Fedayeen Saddam, a paramilitary group notorious for its ruthless methods and unwavering loyalty to Saddam Hussein's regime. This shadowy militia, composed primarily of fanatical supporters, was tasked with suppressing dissent, instilling fear, and maintaining absolute control over the population. Their signature Darth Vader-inspired black uniforms added an aura of intimidation, symbolizing their brutal and uncompromising nature. Under Uday's leadership, the Fedayeen Saddam quickly earned a reputation for carrying out barbaric acts designed to terrorize the populace. Public executions became a grim spectacle, often conducted in front of large crowds to serve as warnings to potential dissidents. One of the group's most infamous practices was the use of power drills to bore holes in prisoners' skulls. Reports also emerged of captives being tortured with electric shocks, burned with acid, and subjected to other forms of inhumane treatment. The Fedayeen's activities extended beyond Iraq's borders as well. Uday allegedly ordered the group to assassinate exiled dissidents and intimidate critics abroad, solidifying their status as an instrument of terror. Their operations became synonymous with Uday's unchecked power, further cementing his image as one of Iraq's most feared and sadistic figures. In contrast to Uday, Qusay Saddam Hussein, born in 1967, was reserved and calculated, preferring to operate from the shadows. His quieter nature earned him a reputation as the more level-headed and disciplined of the two brothers, traits that endeared him to their father. Saddam recognized Qusay's potential as a trusted confidant and groomed him for significant roles within the regime from an early age. Unlike Uday, whose public displays of violence often attracted attention, Qusay's focus on organization, loyalty, and discretion made him an indispensable figure in Saddam's inner circle. Those close to the family described him as methodical and pragmatic, qualities that would later define his leadership style within the regime's oppressive machinery. In 1988, Qusay was appointed deputy director of Al-Amn al-Qas, Iraq's special security organization. This agency was critical to maintaining Saddam's control over Iraq, functioning as the regime's enforcer in eliminating opposition. The organization operated in secrecy, coordinating abductions, assassinations, and covert surveillance to identify and neutralize perceived threats. Under Qusay's direction, Al-Amn al-Qas became one of the most feared entities in Saddam's regime. One of Qusay's most infamous roles was his brutal suppression of the 1991 uprisings that erupted across Iraq in the aftermath of the Gulf War. These uprisings, fueled by widespread discontent and calls for political reform, were met with a devastating response. Qusay orchestrated the destruction of the southern marshlands, a vital ecological and cultural area that had sustained Shia Arab communities for centuries. By draining these marshes, Qusay not only displaced tens of thousands of people, but also decimated their way of life, turning a flourishing habitat into a desolate wasteland. This act of ecological and cultural destruction was part of a broader strategy to crush dissent and ensure the regime's dominance. By 1996, Qusay had become chairman of the Iraqi National Security Council. This position granted him oversight of Iraq's intelligence agencies, including the feared Mukhabarat, which specialized in espionage, surveillance, and eliminating political opposition. His new authority allowed him to direct these agencies with ruthless efficiency, employing a network of informants to root out dissent and ensure loyalty to Saddam's regime. Furthermore, Qusay gained control over Iraq's financial dealings, including revenues from illicit oil trade and state enterprises. This not only enabled him to amass significant personal wealth, but also provided the resources needed to consolidate his political power and expand his influence within the regime. Qusay's quieter, methodical strategies endeared him to his father, which in turn solidified his position as Saddam's preferred successor, further exasperating the rivalry between the two brothers. By the late 1990s, Qusay's influence extended into every aspect of Iraq's security and intelligence apparatus, making him one of the most powerful figures in the country. In preparation for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the United States and its coalition allies developed a strategy aimed at dismantling Saddam's regime. A crucial element of this strategy was identifying, locating, and either capturing or neutralizing key figures within Saddam's inner circle. To systematize the process of apprehending these individuals, coalition forces devised a unique tool: a deck of cards. Each card in the deck represented one of the 55 most wanted figures in Saddam's government. This innovative approach served multiple purposes. It functioned as a practical resource for soldiers on the ground, enabling them to quickly recognize high-value targets. It also served as a psychological tactic, reducing these feared figures to a deck of playing cards. Uday and Qusay Hussein were placed near the top of the list. Uday was designated the Ace of Hearts, while Qusay was the Ace of Clubs. These designations were not arbitrary. While Uday's violent escapades were well known and often publicized, Qusay's actions were equally, if not more, insidious. His ability to maintain a low profile while exercising immense control made him a particularly dangerous figure. This made his capture or elimination a top priority for coalition forces, as his continued existence posed a direct threat to the coalition's efforts to establish a post-Saddam Iraq. The decision to offer a $15 million reward for information leading to their capture reflected their significance and the difficulty of apprehending them. The substantial bounty was intended to incentivize Iraqis to come forward with information, leveraging the discontent of those who had suffered under the brothers' reign of terror. For the coalition, capturing or eliminating Uday and Qusay was seen as essential to dismantling the remnants of Saddam's regime. As coalition forces swiftly advanced through Iraq in 2003, the collapse of Saddam's regime became inevitable. The regime's leaders were suddenly thrust into survival mode. Once figures of immense power and fear, they were now fugitives, desperately attempting to avoid capture or death at the hands of coalition forces. While Saddam moved independently to evade detection, Uday and Qusay sought safety together. Their first plan of action was to flee to neighboring Syria. The choice of Syria was likely a calculated one. The two countries shared a historically complicated relationship, but both were governed by Ba'athist regimes, making it a potential safe haven. Additionally, Syria had provided support to Saddam's Iraq during various periods and was seen as a place where Uday and Qusay might leverage political connections or sympathetic contacts to secure asylum. However, the brothers' plan quickly unraveled. As they approached the Syrian border, their requests for entry were denied. Under intense international scrutiny following the US-led invasion, Syria was unwilling to risk the fallout of harboring two of the world's most wanted men. Damascus likely understood the consequences of granting asylum to Uday and Qusay, as it would have jeopardized its already precarious position on the global stage. The refusal to admit the brothers marked a pivotal moment, leaving them stranded and without a clear escape route. With no refuge in Syria, Uday and Qusay turned to Mosul, a city in northern Iraq that held strategic and symbolic significance. Known for its diverse population of Arabs, Kurds, and other ethnic groups, Mosul was a complex and volatile city, making it an attractive hiding place for those seeking to exploit its social dynamics to evade detection. Additionally, Mosul was a region where Saddam's regime had loyal supporters, some of whom were willing to risk their lives to protect his family. The brothers found shelter with Nawaf al-Zaydan, a distant relative of Saddam Hussein and a longtime supporter of the regime. Al-Zaydan's mansion, a heavily fortified and well-guarded structure, became their refuge. The mansion's fortified nature reflected the paranoia and preparedness of Saddam's inner circle, who had anticipated scenarios in which they might need to defend themselves against both internal and external threats. On July 22, 2003, U.S. forces received a tip-off about the brothers' whereabouts. They launched a meticulously planned and high-stakes operation to capture or eliminate the brothers. The critical lead that led to the siege came from an informant, reportedly motivated by the $15 million reward offered for the information leading to the brothers' capture. The informant, later identified as Nawaf al-Zaydan himself, the very man who had offered Uday and Qusay shelter, betrayed them. Al-Zaydan's motives remain a subject of speculation, with theories ranging from fear of retribution by coalition forces to the allure of financial reward amidst the chaos of post-invasion Iraq. The intelligence provided was precise, detailing the layout of the mansion and the presence of Uday, Qusay, and Qusay's teenage son Mustafa. Armed with this information, the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, supported by Special Operations Forces, quickly mobilized for the high-profile mission. The operation began with the encirclement of the al-Zaydan mansion, located in Mosul's Al-Falah neighborhood. The property, heavily fortified with reinforced walls and guarded by loyalists, posed a formidable challenge. U.S. forces sealed off all potential escape routes, ensuring that occupants were effectively trapped. Loudspeakers were used to issue demands for surrender, offering the brothers a chance to give themselves up peacefully. However, true to their reputation for defiance and violence, Uday and Qusay refused to comply. Instead, they barricaded themselves on the mansion's upper floors, prepared to fight to the death. Alongside them was 14-year-old Mustafa, who had also chosen to stand and fight. The first exchange of gunfire was intense and chaotic. U.S. forces came under heavy fire from the mansion's windows as the brothers used their fortified position to full advantage. Armed with machine guns, grenades, and other small arms, they launched a fierce counterattack that temporarily slowed the coalition's advance. Despite their inferior numbers, Uday and Qusay demonstrated remarkable resolve, using the layout of the mansion to frustrate their attackers. Their familiarity with guerrilla tactics and the defensive features of the property made the initial assault costly for U.S. forces. 4 American soldiers were wounded in the early stages of the battle. As the stalemate continued, U.S. forces escalated their assault, deploying increasingly heavy firepower to neutralize the defenders. Anti-tank rockets were fired to breach the mansion's reinforced walls, and TOW missiles, mounted on Humvees, targeted specific areas of the building where the defenders were entrenched. The coalition also called in aerial support, with attack helicopters circling above to provide real-time intelligence and suppressive fire if necessary. The siege became a battle of attrition, with U.S. forces determined to avoid unnecessary casualties, while systematically dismantling the mansion's defenses. A particularly tragic aspect of the siege was the involvement of Qusay's son, Mustafa. At just 14 years old, he displayed the same ferocity and determination as his father and uncle. Witness accounts and reports from the battlefield suggest that Mustafa actively participated in the defense, opening fire on U.S. soldiers and refusing to surrender until the very end. Mustafa's presence highlighted the intergenerational violence and indoctrination that defined Saddam Hussein's regime. Born into a family of privilege and power, Mustafa had been raised in an environment where loyalty to the regime and readiness for violence were instilled from an early age. His death, alongside his father and his uncle, added a poignant layer of tragedy to the events in Mosul. After hours of intense fighting, U.S. forces made the decision to deploy 10 TOW missiles in a decisive effort to end the standoff. These precision-guided missiles caused catastrophic damage to the mansion, collapsing sections of the structure and setting it ablaze. With the mansion heavily compromised, U.S. troops launched their final assault, storming the upper floors where Uday, Qusay, and Mustafa had taken their last stand. The resistance by this point had significantly weakened, as the defenders were likely disoriented and injured from the sustained barrage of missiles and gunfire. When the firefight ended and the smoke cleared, U.S. forces discovered the lifeless bodies of Uday, Qusay, and Mustafa on the mansion's upper floor. Uday and Qusay had sustained over 20 bullet wounds each. Mustafa, despite his youth, was also killed in the confrontation, reportedly after continuing to resist until the very end. To confirm the brothers' identities, the U.S. military conducted thorough autopsies. Photographs of their bodies were taken and distributed to the media, a controversial decision aimed at proving to the Iraqi people and the world that Uday and Qusay were indeed dead. This was seen as a critical step in dismantling the psychological grip of Saddam's regime, as the brothers' survival could have been used to perpetuate fear and unrest. The photographs, while gruesome, were deemed necessary to bring closure to the countless victims of Uday and Qusay's brutality. Their faces, disfigured by the battle, had to be reconstructed using mortician's putty before being made public. Despite the controversy surrounding the release of these images, they served as powerful evidence that the regime's reign of terror was coming to an end.